Hello, welcome back to another Theory Thursday. I have another story-driven episode for you today. What I have here is a very short, very brief, and condensed version of the history of the jazz guitar. Now, I'd like to point out this is not the history of jazz. It would be a much longer list. This is just the history of jazz guitar, and even this is very condensed. So if I'm going to miss some names, I'm going to miss some very important things, but that's just because of the condensed nature I have here. It's a summary, right? So a broad view of the jazz guitar. So I have my Mickey Mouse watch on today. I have my gray tweed tie on today, and I think that's it. As always, if you've been enjoying these, please like and subscribe. I love to make these, and that helps the channel keep going and grow and all that good stuff. So, without further ado, the history of the jazz guitar. Let's go. Okay, before I start, I just want to shout out most of the info I have here is from sheetmusicdirect.com. They have an excellent article from, I think it was 2017 they posted it. And it was in a blog, actually. So, you wouldn't have found it if you weren't looking for it. But it's just a fantastic resource. So, if you're interested in it, go look up sheetmusicdirect.com and just look up the history of the jazz guitar. It's an excellent article. And of course, it's longer than what I have written down here. This is a summary of most of what's in there. So let's get into it. The history of the guitar in jazz is marked by three significant battles. 1, becoming part of jazz. 2, achieving audibility. And 3, finding a unique role in the music. Over time, the guitar triumphed in these struggles and has entered a golden age. Now, that's arguable, but that's what we have written down here. Number 1, New Orleans jazz, or New Orleans. This is ranging from about 1889 to about 1920. Jazz guitar's journey began in New Orleans, with guitars appearing in early jazz groups even before Eddie Lang, who we'll talk about in a little bit, even before his notable contributions in 1925. In 1889, guitarist Charlie Galloway led a string band that included brass and woodwind players, laying the groundwork for early jazz ensembles. Other notable guitarists from this era include Brock Mumford, Lorenzo Stalls, Dominic Barocco, Joe Guiffre, Coochie Martin, Rene Baptiste, and Louis Capard. These early jazz guitarists were integral to string bands, which were common in New Orleans from 1890 to about 1920. These bands usually comprising guitar, bass, mandolin, or violin, played for dances and parties, but were overshadowed by brass bands in louder settings. Now, of course, they were overshadowed. When you get woodwinds and brass together, that's very loud and a lot louder than a guitar can do, right? And even some of the other stringed instruments, right? Violins and cellos and those bowed instruments, they can put up a very good fight against brass and woodwinds, but plucked string instruments, not so much. So let's keep going. Next up, 1920 to about 1930. Before 1925, Nick Lucas was a pioneering jazz guitarist, recording solo pieces and playing in studio orchestras. Despite the dominance of banjos in early jazz recordings due to their louder sound, right? What we just talked about, Lucas's work paved the way for the guitar. Then along comes Eddie Lang. He further establishes the guitar's place in jazz, transitioning from banjo to guitar and excelling in New York studio sessions. By the mid-20s, improved recording techniques helped the guitar surpass the banjo in jazz ensembles. However, Early guitarists like Lane often played supporting roles with rare solo opportunities, right? So the music drives north from New Orleans all the way up to New York, where all the bigwig studios are, right? And when you get in a studio with microphones, and it's easier to capture the guitar along with everything else, right? You put a microphone closer over here than it is over here, and all of a sudden you can hear it through a mix. And this was before, of course, advanced recording techniques, but the sound of the guitar prevailed over the banjo, right? And it was kind of a departure of what we now call as Dixieland into a totally different genre, right? And the guitar matched the sound that everyone wanted. So that's what happened there. All right, 1930 to about 1950. In the 1930s, we saw the rise of Django Reinhardt, whose work with the quintet of the Hot Club of France showcased the guitar's potential in jazz. Now, if you don't know Django Reinhardt, highly recommend looking him up. He's also got a fantastic story, an unbelievable story where he overcomes a lot physically. On his left hand, he's disabled down to about 2 fingers because of a fire in his family home. And he goes on to become this famous guitarist just with the 2 fingers. Incredible story. Incredible player. All right. Reinhardt's influence was significant, but the advent of the electric guitar revolutionized the instrument's role. Of course it did. With volume comes power, right? Charlie Christian's joining Benny Goodman's band in 1939 marked a turning point. Christian's innovative use of the electric guitar allowed it to compete with horn players, right? Because you just need to turn up a volume knob, transforming guitar solos in jazz. His influence shaped guitar styles for decades, with many guitarists in the 1940s and beyond drawing from his techniques. And I would argue, it says decades here, it's gonna be a century coming up here. So you can't overstate the influence that he had, but it's all, you could also argue he wouldn't have had that influence without the electric guitar, right? Because without the amp, where's the volume? Okay, 1950 to about 1969, the bop era introduced guitarists like Barney Kessel, Chuck Wayne, Billy Bauer. None of them had the impact of Charlie Christian. Not to say they weren't amazing, fantastic players, but the level of influence that an artist held, right, in the community, they didn't meet that with Charlie Christian. The 1950s brought forward notable guitarists like Jimmy Rainey, Johnny Smith, Tal Farlow, Herb Ellis, Kenny Burrell, and lots more. Each of them contributing to jazz guitar's evolution. The 1960s saw the rise of Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, George Benson, who further developed the guitar's voice in jazz, heavily influenced by Christian's legacy. And these guys, Wes and Grant in particular, I would argue, also came close to Charlie Christian's influence. These guys, and a lot of these guys, when now back in the day, jazz was not a how do I say it? Serious isn't the right word. I want to say it wasn't a serious music, but it wasn't until the virtuosity became prevalent that it was, really taken seriously. But it wasn't taught in colleges, right? You couldn't go get a jazz degree. This was music that was played mostly by ear. And nowadays, when people get into jazz guitar, a lot of the time, first place that gets recommended to them or the first place they go is Wes Montgomery. Okay, so saying that it can show the impact he had on the guitar community, right? All right, but that's not to say they weren't. Of course, they were all influenced heavily by Charlie Christian. So, all right, next up, 1960s onward. From the late 1960s, jazz guitarists began to explore new directions. Larry Coryell emerged as the first fusion guitarist, blending rock and electric blues with jazz. Szabo and Derek Bailey introduced unique styles, while John McLaughlin's innovative approach expanded the guitar's possibilities in jazz. McLaughlin's influence led to the diversification of jazz guitar styles, with players like Al Di Meola, Larry Coryell, Pat Martino, who's also got an incredible story, right, overcoming things. He had a whole memory thing. You should look up Pat Martino. Maybe we'll do a deep dive episode. John Abercrombie and Mike Stern exploring various genres and techniques. So just to think about where we were fighting to become part of the band and just trying to match the volume of other instruments to now creating our own genres, and it's because of the guitar's influence that other things are getting done, and it's just an incredible journey that we've got here. Excuse me. And my last little paragraph here is modern jazz guitar, which is about the present. Today, the jazz guitar scene is a vibrant and diverse area. The big three of modern jazz guitar: Pat Metheny, John Scofield, Bill Frisell. Now, obviously, that's up for debate, but that's what we have listed here. Each of them have distinct sounds and musical personalities, continuing to push the boundaries of the genre. Numerous guitarists play mainstream jazz or historical styles, while others, like Larry Carlton, Lee Ritenour, bridge pop and jazz together. The resurgence of gypsy jazz, inspired by Django Reinhardt, remember him from earlier, has also brought new attention to the acoustic guitar in jazz, right? Because he was right before Charlie Christian and his electric. The potential of the jazz guitar is limitless, with contemporary players like Kurt Rosenwinkel, Julian Lage, Anthony Wilson, and Eugene Chadbourne contributing to a rich and evolving tradition. So that's the short and condensed and brief version of the history of the jazz guitar. Now, of course, there's stuff I missed: big events, big concerts, big names. But of course, it's condensed and I can only hit so much. So, who did I miss? What big jazz guitarists did I miss? Leave them down in the comments. And I think that's enough information for today. Yeah. And as always, if you've been enjoying these, please like and subscribe. It always helps the channel. I love making these videos, so I'm going to keep doing it. And I think that's all I got. So we'll see you for the next one. Bye.